Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Jeremiah chapter 18, and we are going to get into a very interesting thought that I want to also interject along with what Jeremiah is talking about. And then there's a few thoughts that's going to intersect with this. But overall, when we talk about the sovereignty of God, so you start with, and this is what it's going to be brought out, the sovereignty of God, that God is sovereign. Now, I would say it should go without saying, however, because we live in a fallen state, not everybody then, of course, subscribes to the sovereignty of God. But I'm trying to look because there's uh when we put like this, when we talk about the fact that God is sovereign, that it goes. Here's my point: whether we believe this or not is irrelevant. In other words, if I deny the sovereignty of God, it's irrelevant. In other words, so what? I will soon discover His sovereignty. Meaning this, um, every one of us who is walking the earth, what we have in common is that we are suspended between birth and death. And because we are suspended between birth and death, we walk in a spiritual darkness. In other words, that God is not visible. And for a believer, we walk by faith. For the unbeliever, they walk in their own way. So, as a Christian, I cannot prove the existence of God. I believe the existence of God by faith. I believe the claims of the Bible by faith. Any other thoughts on that becomes subjective. So if I tell you, well, God has spared my life, there are millions of people who can say the same thing. In other words, there are millions of people who haven't died in a plane crash. Okay, I haven't died in a plane crash. I've never experienced a plane crash, but so have millions of people as well. The unfortunate ones who have, some survive, some haven't, but millions of haven't. So my point is, it becomes subjective. If I say, well, God saved me, well, He saved a lot of people. If I throw another scripture in that says, well, He reigns on the just as well as on the unjust, well, that covers a lot of ground. But so when I think about other schools of thought, such as, let's say, for example, Calvinism comes to mind, that they would use this verse of scripture here to support their thought of the sovereignty, what they teach as far as the sovereignty of God. And one of the main thoughts is that God sovereignly chooses some to be saved, and then He sovereignly chooses those others to be lost. Okay, now, and they're going to use this. What I want to say is that's not what Scripture portrays. In other words, when we say that God was sovereign and in His, we could follow that with, so what did He choose? I'm not going to get obviously into that, but these are just some thoughts to me when I think about as we this chapter as we get into it. So let's bring it up so I won't get too lost into this chapter, which I am already tempted to do. All right, excuse me. Jeremiah chapter 18 says, "This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down at once to the potter's house. There I will reveal my words to you." So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working away at the wheel. But the jar that he was making from the clay became flawed in the potter's hands. So he made it into another jar, as it seemed right for him to do. The word of the Lord came, the word of the Lord came to me, "House of Israel, can I not treat you as this potter treats his clay?" Now, let me stop and look at that statement alone. Because again, as I said, to me, there's a lot that intersects here. Atheists will challenge the thought of God. They don't challenge God because they don't believe in God. At least they say they deny the existence of God. So oftentimes what they're doing is they're challenging the thought, the validity of the Bible. One of the ways is that if God is such a loving God, then how could he do thus and so? How could he, for example, order Israel to execute entire villages, including women and children? Often they may even say, well, how is God sending people to hell? Now they say that to try to disprove God, even the very thought of it. In other words, to conclude because he does that he's not God. And my reply is often, it doesn't mean that because he does it that he's not God. Now, let me give you an example. And this is going to be kind of a crude example. If you go to Russia and you see the president, and we know him as a brutal dictator. Well, the fact that he's brutal doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. Same thing with North Korea. These are brutal dictators. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It means we just disagree with them. Me personally, never plan to go to Russia or North Korea at all. Don't want to go because of that very reason. If when God makes his declaration, okay, you may not understand it, you may not agree with it, but it doesn't mean that he's not God. But this statement right here, when he says, "Can I not treat the house of Israel as I please?" And there are many statements or scriptures that we can look at that fall under the sovereignty of God, that falls under the fact that, okay, God does as he please. Now, what I would say in the long run is, how does he please? In other words, what has he chosen? And especially when it comes to salvation. And one of the things I refute with Calvinism is the idea that their belief is God sovereignly chooses everyone. So some to heaven, some to hell. Now, the way I refute that in general is that, so if he does, okay, then if you're not chosen, you're screwed. That's plain and simple. They dance around that. They shy away from talking about that. In other words, for the sake of this immediate context here, let's say I'm not chosen, then by preaching to me, you're actually preaching against the will of God. Now, that, like I say, it's something that they dance around. But here's my point: if God, because if it's true that God sovereignly chooses some to be saved and sovereignly chooses others not, if it's true, it doesn't matter because God is sovereign. What we have is a revelation from God to tell us what his will is, what he wants us to know. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's why I say when we talk about the sovereignty of God, let's further complete the sentence and say, well, what did he choose? Now let's go back to another kind of issue as far as if God is sovereign. Why did God order the execution of women and children, for the armies of Israel to carry out? Well, I'm going to say we don't have enough information to be able to render a judgment against God. In other words, he, in some cases, well, he does tell us why, but the why sometimes what we don't understand, especially when it comes to the children, right? But he tells us to execute the innocent children. And I could try to give you circumstantial responses that because God does not plainly explain, that's as far as we can go. Now, another example of the sovereignty of God here, look at Job. Now, this is one of the most perplexing ones to people. The book of Job, which is the first book of the section of literature when you look at the Old Testament. Now, we have went through the book of Job. And one of the most interesting things is even how Job is laid out. The first two chapters of the book of Job, well, first you open up with this heavenly scene. No, the first you open up with the declaration that Job is a good man, a righteous man, flawless in his generation, right? Flawless. He's good. He does good. He goes out of his way to do what is good, to do what is right. So you open with that, and that is clearly established by God. Job is good. Then you flash to a heavenly scene where Satan comes in the presence of God with the sons of God or the angels. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because Job, the book of Job, shatters so many theological thoughts. It's unbelievable. You would be wise to just read the book of Job as it is stated. But anyway, God asked Satan, where have you been? He said, from running up and down to and fro the earth. And then here's what becomes another interesting twist. God says, have you considered my servant Job? Satan says, sure, but you put a hedge around him. He says, I tell you what. He says, well, let me back up. God says, have you considered my servant Job, an upstanding, righteous man, none like him? Righteous. Satan says, sure, I'll consider him, but you have a hedge around him. I dare you to take the hedge. I'm paraphrasing y'all. I dare you to take the hedge away from him, and I'll make Job curse you to your face. God says, okay, go ahead, do it. Only don't take his life. Now, just in that, there's so much revelation that shatters a lot of our theological thoughts. So the question is why? Okay, we'll table that. Satan goes out, destroys Job's life, his wealth, and even his children, killed his children. The second chapter opens with the same heavenly scene, opens up. God says, where you been? He says, running to and fro. He says, have you considered my servant Job, righteous man? And even though you move me to destroy him without cause, he still upheld his integrity. He says, yeah. But I tell you what, skin for skin. Obviously, everybody would hang on to their wealth. Take his wealth away and he'll curse you to your face. God says, go ahead, but don't take his life. So Satan does that, afflict him with boils, whatever kind of sickness he has. Even his wife says, look, why don't you just curse God and die? He says, you talk like a foolish woman. Now, the rest of the book of the Job, from chapters 3 on, is really just a back and forth dialogue between Job's friends and Job. His friends come, and what is interesting about the friends, they don't know what's the heavenly scene, but then they just spend all their time trying to get Job to admit you did something wrong. This is why this happened to you. Job says, I didn't do anything wrong. Nothing wrong. All right. So the question becomes, why did God um, do that to Job? And here's the interesting thing. God never explains himself. He never says, this is why I did that. At the end of the book of Job, God appears to Job and basically blasts Job for saying, you really think you can justify yourself? You really think you can condemn me to justify yourself? Really? You really want? We're going to talk. And at the end of that, Job was like, I'll open my mouth, because in the preceding chapters, as I said, the bulk of the book of Job is the back and forth between him and his friends. And basically Job was like, I didn't do anything wrong. And then he gets to the point where he says, well, if God was here, I would ask God, why? You explain yourself to me, God. And God shows up and says, okay, we're going to talk. Job says, I changed my mind. God said, no. We're going to talk. Well, God never explains himself. Look, Job, just want you to know, this is why I did. This is why I let the devil do that. He never explained himself. Not once. So you may go, well, why did God do that? Because he could. Because here's the thing. God is sovereign. God is sovereign. His sovereignty, he is creator. He creates all of us. And in verse 5 here, he says, this is the word of the Lord that came to me, house of Israel. Can I not treat you as this potter, his clay? This is the Lord declaration. Just like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, house of Israel. Now, God's poverty. See, God's poverty. I mean, not poverty, sovereignty. Sovereignty. Okay? I am God. Now, this, to me, if we want to even dig deeper, is that there's a lot we don't know. The Bible is a snippet when you think about eternity, think about man's time on earth. God really just is telling us what he has deemed important for us to know. So, like, just in talking about the book of Job, how here you have this picture where Satan comes into heaven. Now, for years, didn't know that Satan can even go into heaven, right? I didn't know that. And here you have this, whatever the picture is, Satan comes into heaven. And then another thing is, the book of Job dispels this notion of a good versus evil, that God is going back and forth trying to get more souls than the devil, and then Satan is bragging about how many souls he can get. No, you see God's sovereignty. He says you could destroy Satan's life, but you can destroy Job's life, but you can't kill him. But here's the interesting thing: Satan doesn't kill him. That just gives us a whole lot of different perspective on God's sovereignty. That God is very much in control. Very much in control. Very much. Okay. Now, I'm going to elaborate on that a little more in the next video, because this idea of the sovereignty of God, God is sovereign. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. See you in the next study.